Alright, so when I go to start me motorbike, this Honda Goldwing here, it makes a horrible sound. If I turn my key on, try to crank it over here. It sounds absolutely wretched. And the sound you can feel and hear that things are clanking around right here, and this is the alternator, and the starter clutch is also up in here. And I believe that's what their sound is. The starter is right there, and then there's the gear for the starters here, and there's a chain that runs inside this housing up to the alternator housing up here. And there is the starter clutches on the back side of the alternator housing, and it has a couple little roller bearings and things like that inside there. I believe that's where our sound is coming from. So that involves taking the engine out and taking this back cover off once again. So I just happen to have some engine pieces here from the exact same engine. This is a GL1100. So this is on the back side of the alternator housing. This is the alternator housing right here, and on the back side of it we've got the starter clutch. This is basically this guy right here. And you can see on the inside of this starter clutch, we've got right here, this is one of those little sort of roller bearings that I referred to earlier. That's probably not the technical term. And these guys, I believe, is where my sound is coming from. These are messed up somehow in there. They're not operating the way they're supposed to, and they're just clunking around in there. This is something that I've read. This is an area of the engine because they don't really have any direct oil feed, and over time these get all crusted up, rusty, and they fail. So I'm going to replace these. I've got these ordered. I ordered a kit. Inside here there's this little bearing. There's another little rod that pushes on that, and then behind that rod there is a spring. So all three of those pieces go into each one of these things, and so there's three of each of those. And then we'll get the engine apart in the meantime and take this off and see what's going on with the one on the actual engine. On the back side of this, on the engine, this goes onto the alternator shaft, and on the back side of the alternator shaft there's this guy, and that's the chain inside here. That's the starter chain. Let me pull that out. It's all tied together in one piece. So this would be the starter chain. This chain runs from, the gear for the starter is this little one, to this bigger gear, and this is what goes onto the alternator shaft. And inside there's a bearing. If you can see that. You can see the bearing inside there, a roller bearing. All the little rollers inside the bearing. I think it's 28, 33, 26 is the dimension on this bearing. And they don't make these anymore. Honda does not sell these bearings anymore. And so you can find them. I think I found one place that actually has them still, but I'm not sure if they really have them until I actually go to order it. At which point sometimes you get that answer, oh, we don't have that actually. We just didn't update our website. So we'll leave it in there. If nothing else, I can swap out this whole gear onto the other engine if need be, if the bearing in the other one is bad. But the way this is set up, it's got a nice smooth surface here. It fits inside here like that, and then it will spin this way when the engine rotates like this. So if this is the back side of the engine over here, it rotates that way, the alternator housing. And so when the engine's rotating, this is rotating like this, and this gear spins freely, no problem. And so when you go to engage the starter, it will go to spin the engine and rotate this that way. So when the gears engage, if you try and rotate it that way, it engages. And so it rotates the engine and starts it, and then the engine starts spinning, and then this freely rotates by itself. So, and that all happens thanks to these little guys in here, which grab a hold of this thing and allow it to spin the engine, and then allow it to let go and the engine to spin freely. So that's how it's supposed to work. And then this is the other part of it, this guy here. So basically how this is set up on the engine, when you take the back cover off, this guy is in here. You've got that chain wrapped around here that goes down to the starter, and then this guy slides onto this, which is your alternator shaft, like so. And that's what you see when you take the back cover off, is this guy, and it's got another bolt and everything on there that holds that together. All right, I'm gonna break me off some. Take this rear cover off. Got all the bolts out. Now it's time to just smack it off of there. Alright, so now we're at the alternator rotor. That's this guy here. And this guy is magnetized. So there's a couple things we need to look out for in terms of that. One of them is when we remove this, we have to be very careful not to drop it. Later we'll talk about some parts in there that can become magnetized, which we do not want. In order to get this guy off, on the back side here, you can see there's a little hole there. There's one on each side. And basically you insert a little rod into here and you hold onto this thing and that keeps it from turning. Well, you put a wrench on the front side here. And this nut here is 17 millimeter, the big one. Alright, so there's our bolt and there's a nice chunky washer on there as well. Set those aside. And this guy should slide right off. Yeah, don't drop it. It is heavy. It is heavy. It's magnets and everything, so it is pretty heavy. On the back side, that is what we've been going for. This in theory is our problem, the source of our noise. Alright, so taking a better look at this guy, alright, we can see inside there's a little sort of, it looks like a roller bearing sort of situation. In addition to that little roller bearing, there's a little guy next to him that's pushed against the side of it. Those guys move. This is designed to push back like that. There's a little spring back in here, and then there's a little sort of pencil-like thing, and then this roller. This is just a chunk of round stock kind of, and that just rolls in there, and it rolls. And one way it will roll and spin freely, and then the other way it goes like this and then locks in. Then once the engine starts, this starts to rotate on its own, and this is supposed to slide back like that and then spin freely. And what's happening on mine is that this stuff is getting stuck in here. It's not operating the way it's supposed to, and I'm getting a horrible sound from this. So in order to get these out, I believe I just sort of get in here and pull that out like so. And then this guy should come out as well, like that. Oh, you can kind of see the spring attached to the one end there. So there's that, and I don't know if you can, there's the spring. So that's the mechanism on the inside, and you can see sort of rusty bits on there, and so this stuff is sticking, and that's not good. And here's our little sort of roller that lives in there, and it's, like I said, it's just a solid chunk. Alright, so I've got most of the stuff out. I've got 3.5 of these things out. 2 of these little pencil things are out. The other one is stuck. It doesn't want to come out, and that may be my problem right there. The other thing we want to check for when we have these out though is whether or not these have become magnetized. So if they are attracted to each other or repulsed by each other, that's a problem. These don't seem to have that issue, so that was not likely our problem. Alright, and then because mine is so gross inside here, I want to take these 3 bolts off of here so I can take this stuff off and get this cleaned out real well. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to take this and put it back on the engine because these bolts are really tight on here, and I should be able to get better leverage by putting this back on the engine. So let's do that. It goes on like this. I'm flipping it over this way so that I have access to these bolts. And these bolts are a Torx bit, and it's a T40. Alright, go ahead and take these all the way off. Oh shoot, I was hoping I could get that off. Alright, now this bit here is stuck on here really well, and in order to get it off of here, I'm going to stick it back on the engine again, and use my little pry bar thing here. I'm going to stick it in this hole. There's no threads. The threads are deep down inside here. I'm not going that far down. I'm going to use this guy to pry it out of there. Otherwise, this is a bear and it doesn't want to come out. you can see that guy is still stuck in here. It should pop right out of there, but the spring or something is no good, and there it is. Finally got it out. Now I can get in here though and really clean this stuff up. I'm gonna go ahead and give everything a kerosene bath and get it cleaned up real nice. All right, so on my little alternator here, you can see on the surface here, you can see where those little roller bearings used to be, where they've ground little pads and wear marks on the actual rotor here, which is pretty impressive. They've also done, you can see the little circular wear marks where those guys lived. This has got to be a pretty high mileage engine. So luckily I have another alternator rotor here, and I'm going to swap this one out. I'm going to take this one apart, do the same thing, take this apart, clean it up, and get a look at how the wear on this thing and see if this is any better. All right, so interestingly, this one, take the bolts out and this thing comes right out of there. All right, we've got things cleaned up here nice, and I'm gonna go ahead and get my new parts out. This guy here, I'll put a link in the description of where I got this, and it's a nice neat kit. It was just the cheapest way to find all three of those parts. These guys have got two ends on them. You can see that it's got the one end. This is sort of like the wear end. This goes on, that's the end that goes against this guy here. This end back here is actually hollow, and that's where the spring actually goes inside that end, like so. All right, and then I am going to use some high temperature grease here and install these back in here. I'm going to grease this guy up and then put it back in. Grease this guy up. You can do this without taking this guy off. That's what a lot of people recommend, is not to take that off, because the bolts that hold this on here are really tight. So, but I think putting it on the engine like that makes it a lot easier, so I wouldn't worry too much about them being tight. Now, in tightening these Torx bits back down here, I cannot find any torque values anywhere. It's not in the service manual at all. Apparently nobody intends you to actually take this apart. Just something to be aware of. I'm tightening these down to 20, so like 23 foot-pounds. I think that's probably where they're supposed to be. Alright, and we'll go ahead and take this guy back off. Alright, another bit we want to do while we're in here is on this gear here on the alternator drive shaft. There are inside this, there's a bearing. We want to check that bearing. It's a roller bearing. So in order to get that off, it basically involves, there's a bolt. There's a bolt right here. This bolt right there. We want to remove that guy. That's a 10 millimeter. And then this whole gear should come right off. There's a little washer, a splined washer on here. That can come off. This all should come off. There's our starter gear down here. Take that off. Set that aside. And then I'm going to check out our bearing in here. This seems to be in good condition from what I can tell. It rolls real nice. I'll go ahead and I'll clean this up a little bit. Throw some grease in here, and then we'll put it back on there. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this guy. Alright, now I'm reinstalling this retainer and bolt on the bottom here that holds in this gear, and this guy should be torqued to 12 foot-pounds. Alright, so while we're in here, it is also highly advisable to service the clutch oil scavenger pump, which is this guy down here. So in order to get this clutch housing off and the little gear to the pump off, you actually have to remove. There is a little Allen head bolt holding that gear on. Remove that Allen head bolt. All right, and that is a 5mm Allen head bolt on there, and this is the type of wrench you kind of need to get to it. It's got to be pretty long to get past this housing. There's a little washer on the back side of this guy. There's also a circlip on here that needs to be removed as well. All right, so there's that another splined washer on the back side here. Take that off. Get in here with some circlip pliers along with a small screwdriver. There, that's off. Now this whole thing should slide off. And then you can see on the back side, that's how that's set up. Quick, and this is our scavenger pump down here. This is what we want to check out. I want to remove these 3 Phillips head screws. Those come out, and those are somewhere around 5 foot-pounds, 4 or 5 foot-pounds that they're held on there with. And then what we were looking for was, according to what I read online in another forum, was that this gasket here, you see how there's on the bottom of this gasket there is this extra material that covers that little, there's like this little channel, little pathway there, and at the very bottom of the gasket that pathway comes down and there's gasket material there. And you can see if you look inside here that there's the same channel on the back side, and so that's an open part there, and that's where the pump will suck fluid up in through there. And what happens is that this gasket will sometimes fold over and get blocked or obstruct that pathway. And so the recommendation was to cut this gasket, basically separate the gasket right there, and so that whole pathway is clear and there's no way that this thing can fold back up on itself. Clearly that was not an issue on this particular engine, but it's supposedly an issue on a lot of these 4-cylinder engines. So I do have a new gasket for this clutch oil pump, and so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make my modification and then install it on the pump and put it back in the clutch. The other thing that you can do according to the manual, but it doesn't really, you can check the clearances on the pump here, and basically you're checking the clearance between the 2 rotors here. I don't even have anything that's small enough to check this with. I mean, my smallest guy here is 0.02 of an inch. Alright, so 0.02 of an inch will go in there. I don't have any directions or any specs in the manual I have, the climber's manual, to tell me what the specs are supposed to be on there. I have specs for the main oil pump, which I can only assume is similar, and the specs on that are that it has to be less than 0.13 of an inch, so that's significantly bigger. So I should be good. Alright, so here is my gasket, and it's been cut now. It's got this gap down the middle there so that it can't potentially block the oil uptake passage. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the old one from the pump here. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up real quick with a razor. Now it's cleaned up, I'm going to put my gasket on here. So here's our new modified gasket. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this back on the engine. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall clutch housing and a little gear back here. And then the little Allen head bolt that goes down and holds that gear on. And then we got our circlip that needs to go back on there. Now this is in here nice and solid. Put our washer back on here. Put our splined washer, put that back on. Then I think we got everything back together in terms of the clutch housing now, and so now it's just a matter of putting our alternator rotor back on here. All right, and so putting the alternator rotor back on, backside we've got those rollers on the backside, and those are going to get in the way. And they're not going to want to let you put it over this and get it seated on here. You've got these 3 little holes here. There's one there, one there, one there. And those are basically, you can rotate these rollers off to the side and stick a little something in there to hold the roller up. And then you can get it on there and then take that out. So you can use little tiny straws or whatever you got. Let's see what I've got here. All right, so I've got a few of these old aerosol straws, like from brake cleaner and that sort of thing. And so I'm gonna use these. Roll this thing off to the side and jam the straw in there. All right, and that should hold everything back. And then hopefully I can get this on there and then get this old straws out. All right, then once you've got it on to the actual rolling surface back there, then we can hopefully stick it in there. All right, now the alternator shaft bolt on the end here is supposed to be 58 to 69 foot-pounds. That's the torque spec. Look at what we got here. That box is our gaskets. Now we can put the engine back together and put it back in the bike. Today's a good day. Alright, let's get some stuff done today because we've got a mess around here. We've got a space issue at the moment where I'm getting projects piled on top of other projects, and this engine, due to my work methodology, I've got everything laid out. I need to get it back together so we can get it back in this bike and then make use of other aspects of the shop again. Alright, let's get this show on the road and get the cover back on here, get our gaskets on here and everything. Make this thing run again. Alright, let's see what we got here. Nice! Honda original equipment. Nice! Look at that, man. We are in business. Alright, so this time I'm going to do what my dad refers to as attaching the gasket or gluing the gasket onto the stationary side. I'm not sure if it matters which side it is, but stationary he refers to as the block side of the gasket mating surface. So like on this example, we've got the rear cover gasket mating surface is right here. That's where the gasket goes, right? And then there's 2 sides of that. There's this side here, which is the block side, the engine block, and then this side here, which is the rear cover. And so the part that is stationary is the engine, the block side over here. And so we would put, when we put the gasket on, we would put this copper coating stuff only on the one side that would face and essentially glue the gasket onto the engine block. So, and the reason I'm doing that is so before I put this copper coat stuff on both sides of the gasket, because I was like, I'm not gonna have any leaks and it's gonna be awesome. But then I had to get back in here, and then that meant the gasket got destroyed because it's a paper gasket. It would tear in parts or whatever because it had essentially this gluey stuff on it, and it wasn't reusable that way. But if you only put this copper coat on one side, then when you go to take it apart, if you have to take it apart again, the gasket stays on the block side and you can remove the other side without tearing the gasket, and then you can reuse it, which is really a money-saving idea, because these gaskets, just these 2 gaskets here, the one for the rear cover here and the one for the clutch down here, $50. That's what that costs. So not cool gasket cost there, but necessary if I want the engine to work. So let's move forward with this. So taking this apart, and now we've got access to this stuff again. And before I do anything else, I think I actually wanted to hook up the battery to this and see if I can spin this starter. and see if it still makes noise or not. That would be a smart move for us. Alright, I've rolled the engine over to the bike and attached it to the power cables on the bike the way it normally would be attached. It's not getting enough power or something. Damn it. Alright, battery's charged. We're gonna try this again. Disconnect this charger real quick. Alright, let's hope this turns over several times. Well, that seems to work. Alright, let's move on. Step 2. Put the cover back on the engine. Alright, I'm going to use some mineral spirits and wipe down the gasket mating surface here real quick, just to get it as clean as I can. Alright, so I also want to do this mating surface over here. Time to get out the gasket and spray this sucker. Big circles in my clutch. It's like this. Alright, that's how it goes on. So I want to spray this side here, so that it will stick to this surface there. Alright. Try and line this up. When you're lining this up, another key thing is this little sort of timing distributor thing here. That lines up with this guy right here. Alright, so there's like a little tab that sticks out on this one. And there's a little indentation mark here where that fits into, that tab fits into here. So you gotta make sure those things are lined up, otherwise it's gonna give you trouble once you get to the very end there. So as I'm putting this on, I'm gonna try and make sure those are lined up. So that's on. Now we need to bolt it down. All these bolts get tightened down to 7 foot-pounds, 7 to 10 foot-pounds. And then these bolts go to, there's a clutch bracket that goes on there, and so that stuff should be with the clutch bracket still. And then this stuff is with these bolts, or there's a couple nuts that go on here, and those should be with the hardware for the clutch cover. And then I'm out of bolts at the moment, so I'm going to tighten down all this stuff to 7 foot-pounds. Alright, I'm going to install the clutch now. So the first thing that goes on there beyond the housing is the splined washer. Just checking to make sure I have my circlip on the housing installed. I do. Alright, so then the splined washer, this random Joe here, this guy goes on. The clutch, the lifter plate, all that stuff is supposed to go on here as a unit, it says. So that guy will go on next. And basically the hard part about this is just aligning all these little tabs on the clutch plates, the friction discs and everything, with the little recesses in the clutch housing, which is really not that hard. Alright, so once that's fully seated, and you know it's fully seated when all the friction discs, the little tabs, are in the housing there. This last friction disc tab is wider than the one before it and everything, and so you can see in the housing itself, if you look real closely, that there's actually, you can see how that last one is wider. You can see right here, the little groove, how it goes down further, and this guy here is wider than the one preceding it. Our next step is, whoa, look at that. This washer is next. It's like a flat washer. The book calls it a lock washer, and that's because it is dished. It's dished that way, where the one side is slightly dished out than the other. It's really hard to see even with the naked eye. You can kind of feel it though. And you know, it's the one side, you've got the right side because it says, let's zoom in on this, because stamped on the outside of it is the lettering outside. If you can read that right there, it says outside. So with the outside stamp facing outside, we put that on there like so. Then next we've got this guy here, this little notch grabby part here goes over one of these buttresses, and the grabby part goes onto the little buttress on the side. It helps to lock that in place. And then we've got our actual nut, and that's supposed to get tightened down to 44 foot-pounds is this nut. And I'm gonna do my best to approximate 44 foot-pounds because I don't have a way of putting a torque wrench on this because I have a special tool that I had to make. I didn't make it in such a way that I could attach a torque wrench to it. So that guy is on there like that. I got it finger tight at the moment. All right, so I have to go grab my special tool. We'll be back. All right, so here's my special happy tool, clutch tool that I made. A piece of wood, another piece of wood, and a piece of pipe. So this piece of pipe has a couple notches in it that stick out, and those notches fit right into the little grooves on that nut. And then this guy, I've got a hole drilled out there so that fits through, and I can turn it and apply some force to that nut. So the way I've got this set up is I utilize a couple of these longer bolts that go into the clutch housing, and those go through my board here, and then through this other piece of wood. And this fits on, and then they screw into the clutch plate, lifter plate here. Alright, and that helps to hold the clutch in place so it doesn't turn. And this guy goes on and locks onto that nut. That should be something like 44 foot-pounds. Now next we get to put on the little springs. Our 6 little springs, these guys go on here next. Alright, we got it. Alright, so this guy goes on like so. We have 2 longer bolts that go on, and the thread that is recessed further has these longer bolts on it. On the clutch lifter plate, you'll see that it has a unique little circle right there, sort of in that recessed area there. There's a little circle, right? There's one there, and there's one over there. Those longer bolts go in there, and those longer bolts also line up with the threads on the back that are recessed. All right, and then once you've got them down finger tight, then we tighten them down in a crisscross pattern to 7 foot-pounds again. Now we've got the little lifter rod here, this guy. Throw him in. I've got the gasket surfaces cleaned up. I'm gonna go ahead and install the gasket now, which is this guy. See how it fits on here. All right, and again, I want the adhesive to go on this side of it so that it sticks to the rear housing here. And then we torque to 7 foot-pounds again. Alright. Bong, 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 bong. It's on. We're happy with that. What's next? What's next? I think putting it back in the bike is next. Alright, so phase 50 or thereabouts is to get the engine back into the bike. We've got a rear cover, a clutch cover, everything is on here. All right, that's on loose. Everything is on loose. In order to get this engine in here, every single engine mount has to be loose, and there are several engine mounts, and then you can tighten it up. I mean, this stuff has to be loose. Even the stuff up here, that little firewall type thing that goes in up here, all these connections have to be loose. And once everything is in and finger tight, then you can start tightening things down. Otherwise, good luck. All right, so we are down to it. I've got the engine back in there. I think I've got everything on the bike that is supposed to be on the bike to make it function. I've got fluids in there, I've got oil back in the engine, I've got coolant back in the radiator, and so I need to start it up and let it warm up so that the coolant can flow through it a little bit, and then I'll have to add more coolant probably. So we need to get that process going. So let's start it up, and more importantly, let's see if it starts up and if our starter clutch pair actually worked. So, big moment here. Smelling gas. Of joy. So for those that might happen to just be tuning in for the starter clutch part here, this video is actually a culmination of a long build series in which we chopped this Goldwing into a bobber, and so getting to the point where we can actually start it like this is pretty exciting. And so it's taken us a while. It's been a long road, a long hill to climb to this point. So happy to be here. We're happy to be here, and so we must dance. And for those that have joined me on this journey, thank you very much for coming along. It has been a pleasure to have you. And you have been very helpful at times with lots of your tips. And I'm planning to have another video following this one, which summarizes the whole journey and encapsulates everything into one video. So keep an eye out for that video. And above all, keep on wrenching on your own projects. Good luck with those. Have fun. And hopefully, we'll see you next time on the next build, because we got other plans coming up. See ya. Thanks.